Welcome to Small Talk with Raincraft. I'm Subha, a leadership and executive coach.
And I'm Hasita. I'm a marketing strategist.
We're just two people who love to talk
and love to learn.
And this is us being curious about the world around us.
Join us.
Hi Yash, good morning. Welcome to Small Talk. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Shubha. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to our chat.
Great. So I think the best places to start is with the startup that you have built, right? Super beings. How did this come about and who are these super beings you're trying to create?
So I'll tackle the second question first, maybe. Who are these super beings we are trying to create? Well, the answer is every one of us, because that's where we come from. The fundamental belief being that all of us are super beings, can be super beings if given the right environment. And specifically, we are focused on the workplace. Essentially, a startup needs to make money, and that's the reason we started focusing on the workplace. So on this line, right? I mean, creating the right environment, if we go a bit deeper, is where the answer to the first question comes from, right? That what are we doing, essentially, right? So in a brief nutshell, we're trying to help organizations create these work environments where all of us can be super beings, right? And when you look at it from a practices perspective or from a practical perspective, what that means is typically how do you help organizations adopt practices which enable the best performance and engagement from people, right? So these practices, specifically the most important ones, relate to goals which people have, then the way their performance is managed, like kind of feedback they're getting, the kind of reviews they're getting, how fair is the whole appraisal process, etc. And then lastly, helping organizations give a voice to each employee, right? Which is essentially enabling continuous feedback upwards from employees, right? Now, typically, if you look at it, what we saw was that this has been mostly an annual affair in most organizations. Like organizations do this annual appraisal where everything stops, and the entire organization is stuck for around 1 to 2 months doing just this thing. Similarly, you have these annual engagement surveys which organizations run once a year and get feedback and all. Now, what we realize is this is something which doesn't work anymore, specifically in today's scenario where a lot more millennials and a lot more younger folks are entering the workplace. They have different expectations than what we had, let's say, not long back, but even let's say
no, for me it was long back, so that's okay.
Right. Yeah. So for us, it's just maybe just 10 years back, it was not the same. Right? But now there are a lot of options available to people. People can choose what they want to work on, where they want to work. And this is where this has become really important, that you need to give continuous avenues to employees to give feedback and get feedback. So this is essentially what we're doing. We're building an integrated performance management and employee engagement platform. This is what it is. The end mission, yes, as I said, trying to help everyone be the super being which they are.
Super. Interestingly, like something that caught my attention when we've spoken earlier is that you guys put a lot of research into this.
Yeah.
While you knew that this is the domain that you wanted to be working in. Just tell me a little about that. Was your background conducive to this, or did you say, okay, but this is what I want to be doing and hence I am going to first learn everything about it?
Yeah. Right. So the problem was, Shubha, always close to our hearts, right? Now, if I give you a story, like essentially the backstory started somewhere in 2017, even though formally we quit our roles and jobs in 2019, somewhere in mid of 2019, to start researching full-time on this. But the informal research, if I can say so, started somewhere back in 2017 when essentially I had left my startup, or the startup I was working at called HouseJoy, and joined Amazon, which was essentially a very, very large organization. Now, coming from an organization where there was a lot of hustle, lot of fast work, lot of decision making, etc., coming to a large corporate like Amazon, it took time to adjust, specifically at that stage, right? And which is where I kind of started reading about this whole aspect about motivation at work, right? And because I realized that like a lot of people around me were happy, but at the same time, a lot of people around me were not so happy as well. And everyone had their own reasons. And just being the curious mind I am, I just try to understand why would that be. The journey started with this book called Drive by Daniel Pink,
Okay.
which talks about motivation at work and motivation 2.0, talks about the three primary aspects, which is what I believe they call the AMP principle, which is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So that is what the book advocated. But the book also passingly mentioned about this book called Flow by Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi, based on positive psychology. It essentially talks about how being in the present moment leads to engagement. And I am an avid book reader, so I pick up books from books. So I picked up Flow from Drive. In Flow, there was a lot of mention about neuroscience and how the brain works, etc. So then from Flow, I went on to this journey about learning about the brain, the dopamine hits, how the brain functions and what keeps you engaged and interested in activities, etc. Slowly, the journey actually ended at reading about Buddhism to some extent.
How interesting.
Because what Flow was saying and what neuroscience was saying was that you need to be in the present moment to be fully engaged and enjoy your life. And this is what I realized Buddhism has been saying for centuries now. So I just read a bit about that where did that come from? And firmly, I've come to believe that a lot of what today's neuroscience says is somehow based on Buddhist principle has been saying for a long while. Right, so this was a 2-year journey which I personally went through. And when the time came to start up on our own, we thought that, hey, we anyways are passionate about this field, so why not do something here? And that is when the time came to start actually reading up science about this field. So earlier we were I was at least gaining knowledge from books which were published, but then I started picking up scientific research papers, and we went through a lot of scientific research papers, published papers around motivation, work practices, etc. For around 8 to 10 months. And essentially, we realized what the best practices are, how should we start thinking about the product, etc. And started on that journey. But to be honest, initially, we had not thought of it in the terms which we describe it today, like performance management and engagement. For us, it was all about motivation at work and the science around that. And now, it so happens that the practices which organizations adopt have an important part to play in keeping the workforce motivated and high performing. And just this is how the product shaped, and this is why we went on that journey. It was a natural progression, essentially, from books to scientific research papers and just understanding and talking to experts and kind of from building the product from there on.
Got it. You clearly bring a lot of richness to the organizations that you work with, because today a line manager or an HR manager would want to, but may not really have the time or the inclination to look at all of this from the scientific angle that you have already done.
Yeah.
Right. So your whatever you're presenting them with comes with kind of all of this in the mix. So there's clearly a huge richness there, which all of us aspire to, but we don't get to in the day-to-day of managing people. So we all know, people leave managers, not organizations, and we tell each other that. What are we doing about it? Are we really getting down to the science behind, like you said, the dopamine hits, the motivation, what makes one guy really give it his all and someone else is just coasting through the task or the job, right? Interesting. But do you find, Yash, that, these generational bands that we have talked about and created, saying, okay, there's a Gen X and there's a Gen Y and there's millennials, do these really exist in the workplace, or are they huge generalizations?
Right. So, Shubha, I think fortunately we have, at least we believe we have the data to say so. Now, we do see some differences essentially between, let's say, the older generation and the current generation per se, if you can say so. Because typically our customer profile is that of fast-growing startups. And we have been working with fast-growing startups since we started, and they form our primary customer base today. The interesting thing about startups is that they are formed of a lot of young folks. and a lot of young managers, a lot of young employees, and very limited kind of gray hairs per se at the top levels. Right now, we keep collecting feedback from people continuously just to help understand what they are essentially not happy with, what is blocking them. And over the past, I think, year and a half, we have collected a fair set of data around what keeps people happy at work and motivated at work. Now, what we have seen based on our data today is that today the primary aspect which drives engagement and job satisfaction at work is the sense of achievement at work.
Okay.
So people today are essentially looking for a sense of accomplishing something at work. That, hey, am I getting challenged enough? Am I fulfilling my true potential? Am I getting to use my strengths at work? Right? This is clearly what the data shows us. So essentially, we just ran a correlation analysis between engagement and input drivers we have. So accomplishment/achievement came out to the top. Now, this is probably in contrast with what we see with the older generation, where aspects like job security, aspects like, let's say, stability matter more. Now, you could think of it maybe also in terms of maturity per se, that people who have seen a lot over the years, the older people or the older generation per se, they are more practical, more wise per se, if I can say so. They have seen and they've probably gone through that journey of chasing accomplishments, chasing achievements, and then they've come to a state where they're happy with what they have, and that is probably a fair realization, right? But at least the younger generation definitely goes after achievement, accomplishment, and this has something which even managers can use managing younger people, right? So just challenge them enough. Just make sure they're using their strengths. There's a lot of talk about finding purpose today that at work, a lot of people talk about, and a lot of young folks specifically talk about, hey, what is my purpose, right? Now, for the older generation, it could be, let's say, kids and family. You want to cater to your kids, you want to cater to your family. Work is one aspect of your life, which is something which you have clearly realized. For the younger generation, that usually translates to strengths, right? What gives you purpose is potentially also the thing which is in line with your strengths, right? So you are good at, let's say, meeting people, you want to probably be happy with sales, in a sales role. You are good with, let's say, your strengths is numbers, you will probably be happy in, let's say, a data specific role, right? So this is something which managers can use today just to try and understand what the strengths of their people are, align resources according to that, so that people just get a sense of accomplishment, right? So there's this saying, right? And if you ask a fish to climb a tree, they will obviously fail, right? So this is something which we want to avoid. It's something which we have realized, and that is something, at least for the younger generation, is probably something people can use.
No, that's useful. I think I joined the workforce more than 20 years ago, and while achievement orientation was there, it was maybe more a means to an end. It was a way to, one, like you said, ensure the job security, and to also then say, okay, there is a path to be followed, that this is the next role you should aspire to, and then the next, and to achieve that, these are some of the boxes that you need to tick along the way. But today, yes, the kids do see it a lot differently, that on a day-to-day basis, am I also being served in a way? That am I also growing? Am I also learning? Am I also doing the things that I want to be doing? So yes, I guess there is that bit of change in the generations.
Right. Yeah.
You brought up something about managers using this effectively. And this is a kind of a conundrum that has me thinking a lot. Is there really a difference between, or what is that difference between manager and leader? Because there is a train of thought which says that each of us, there's that personal leadership. Each of us is a leader. And there are many who, in a way, preach that train of thought. And then there is the time-tested concept of a leader, that you are at a certain level or a certain scale with followers, and there's no leader without followers. Right? So how do you guys look at it?
I think cultural nuances here also is what we've seen. Manager per se is a very European term, is what we've come to believe. And that also has a hangover in India where we actually use the term manager to say. Whereas if you go to the US, there no one is called a manager essentially. And like in our conversations with a few customers and prospects there, we were told this as such, that hey, this manager thing is a very European thing. Here, everyone is a leader. Now, it got us thinking as well that the way we look at it essentially, and that's the cultural perspective, the way we look at it, Shubha, is that you have to also look at it from the perspective of the employee or the team member per se. Now, when they are talking to a manager, or for this conversation, let's not call it a manager, let's just call it the person you're reporting to, right? You definitely look at him or her as your leader, because you don't just expect the person to manage you per se, which is like how much work you've done, how much is achieved, etc., but you actually look up to the person. And this is something which I've personally also started realizing in the startup journey, by the way, when now we have around a 25 to 30 member team, that everything you say as a manager, everything you do as a manager has an impact on people reporting into you. So even if the title says manager, we should definitely not look at it as a managerial role with the sole objective of getting the task done. The thing we should always have in mind is that everything, every word, everything you're saying is getting evaluated from a different lens. And hence, I would think that yes, there should be no concept of a manager per se. Everyone should look at it as a leadership role. The team size could be different. Like someone could be managing a 2-person team, someone could be managing a 30-member team, right? But even in that 2-member team, the person managing the team should be looking at his or her role as that of a leader and look at how they can best enable the team. And that's how we should actually look at it, is what we have realized.
Sure. No, and I think it's a lot like parenting also, right?
Yeah.
The child is always watching you. So the team members are always looking up to see, are they walking the talk? What is their behavior? And hence, should I think about emulating that? And is it a successful behavior pattern? And hence, should I think about emulating that? So true. That's insightful. I want to jump into the kind of work that you do. From what I remember in our earlier interaction, there's a lot of bite-sized learning that happens, right? Do you believe that works? And that too, you mentioned you're an avid reader. And today we have so many avenues to kind of read a book in 15 minutes, read 5 blinks and you'll know the entire book. Here are summaries and you don't have to spend 3 days on the book. So kind of looking at that as a kind of something similar to bite-sized learning. Do you think it works?
I have mixed opinions on that, to be honest, because what I have realized is that it is truly dependent on the individual. So some people like me are into long form content. I can devour lengthy content like as many times in the day as you can throw it at me, right? So I like to read books rather than watching videos. So just to give you an example, on the help websites of a lot of organizations today, they have a video as well as text underneath the video explaining the steps. I never watch the videos. I only read through the text. Whereas there would be some people who just can't take text, right? They would just simply go to video. So everyone, what I've come to realize, has their own style and own personal preferences. So saying that bite-sized learning works or not works is probably not an easy answer. You can't give a blanket answer. The correct answer would be it works for some, it doesn't work for some. What we have seen is what works best, and for a majority of people essentially, is when the learning is integrated into their actions. So when they are doing the activity, if there is some nudging, some coaching, something hand-holding them, that is when learning happens the most. So to give you an example, let's say if you're training for cricket per se, when you are bowling, if there's a coach next to you just taking notes of your actions and just immediately giving you feedback about, hey, you can do this better, hey, you can do this better, that is how learning happens the best. And which is where the content can vary. You can give that learning in the form of a video, you can give that learning in the form of an audio, just a visual. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration when you're trying to teach something to someone. And what becomes really important here is getting feedback right in time, right? And coming back again to the whole approach which I started, right? So we have this whole goals and continuous feedback. I spoke about the importance of continuous feedback, right? This is why it is important. Not only it enhances performance, it also enhances learning, because when feedback is given in time, right on time, that is when people grasp it the most. And that is when they actually change behavior. So the whole point of learning is to get you to change behaviors, all right? And you can only change behaviors when the feedback is in real time. So like again, coming from the neuroscience book example, there are a few professions which are very well suited for engagement and learning per se, because they give you instant feedback. And those professions are professions like sport. Like say you are a tennis player, you're playing tennis, you played a bad shot, you get immediate feedback that, hey, this ball went out of the line. And then next time you will try and control it. This is how behavior changes. Similarly, that of a surgeon. When you are doing surgery, in that moment, you are getting instant feedback from the body of the person that, hey, things are going well or not, right? And that essentially coaches you, or in fact trains your brain to change behavior on the fly. And over time, that behavior becomes ingrained into your brain, and that becomes learning. Essentially, that is what learning is. So this is why this feedback thing is super important, to be in time, in real time as much as possible. But if it is not possible to do it in real time, we should definitely try and give feedback as soon as we see that. So that's how I would look at it. So bite-sized learning in that context is basically, the bite-sized learning is equal to the feedback you're getting, essentially. So that is the bite-sized learning according to me. But if you look at it in a typical way, or we have been used to looking at bite-sized learning where a short 5-minute video comes to you, probably that's not something which works for everyone.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what maybe we need to get better at in organizations, because we look at these as very isolated tracks. We make them into silos. There's a time for learning, and then there's a time for feedback, and that feedback is usually seen as a means to fix a problem, right? Not as something that could be conducive to learning. So I think is quite important. So naturally leads to my next question is, what are we doing wrong today in organizations, especially in the performance management and people management space? What are some of the, let's say, the top 3 things that you feel organizations, small or big, just need to stop doing?
Yeah. So again, I'll probably have to go back to some of the things we spoke about earlier, but a lot of the organizations today still think of feedback, goals and appraisals as a one-time annual affair, as a checklist item, which probably is not the best approach in today's times. Specifically, if you consider, as I had mentioned, the kind of expectations people have today, the kind of options people have today, I think that is something which is soon going to go out of vogue. And essentially, we need to start looking at performance and engagement as a more continuous real-time affair than looking at it as a checklist item once a year. Second thing could potentially be, again, this whole aspect of making performance management a backward-looking initiative. So when you are doing appraisals or reviews, you're always looking at the past. Now, one founder really put it really well for me when we were discussing performance appraisals and reviews. And the example he gave was that when you're hiring someone, you're hiring for potential. And this is a complete stranger, right? You're talking about, you've never known the person, you've never seen the person, you just interacted with the person for 1 hour, and you have formed that judgment that based on what the potential of the person is, this person would be a good fit for the next 1 year in the organization, and you get the person in. Whereas when you are doing this performance review, you are looking at what the person has done in the past rather than what the person can do in the future for the next 1 year, right? And this was something which stuck with me. This was really beautifully put, that we need to stop looking at performance management as just solely dependent on the past. Now, obviously, past performance has to play a role. But again, if you have done the job of giving feedback through the year correctly, and if you have done the job of setting expectations / goals correctly throughout the year, then the person by the end of the year would themselves know that, hey, where do they stand, right? And then the whole surprise element of the annual review, where you are getting like suddenly you're called into a meeting room and say, hey, you met expectations this year, hey, you didn't meet expectations this year, and when there has been no talk about it for the entire year. So this is something which I think needs to change. One is we need to look at performance management as a forward-looking affair. And to do that, the third thing is essentially, again, to move towards a more continuous expectation setting, more continuous feedback approach, because only then will organizations or as a manager, you'll be able to enable forward-looking performance management. Otherwise, it is always going to be a backward-looking performance appraisal system per se. So those are things which at least we have seen, and a lot of founders today, and these are from all kinds of organizations, from unicorns to smaller organizations or younger startups per se. Their stated goal from the whole people management aspect is that we want the end of the year compensation discussion to be a 5-minute conversation where the person already knows what to expect. The person comes into the meeting room, words are exchanged, and everyone just says goodbye. Right? So that's what people actually want. And that is something which is not happening because of this whole annual thing which we are seeing today.
True, because from the goal setting itself, if there is not enough effort put in, then the cascading effect of that is seen, because when you finally sit down and you tell a person, hey, you were not innovative enough or you were not customer centric enough, and it just becomes words you're throwing at them and trying to fix problems rather than coming from that goal orientation and, like you said, the potential of the person. And also what we spoke about today, the person also comes with wanting to do certain things, right? Wanting to have purpose and meaning, and they find it in certain activities. So how is their work aligning to that is also something important.
Yeah.
Great discussion. So let's jump back to you guys as a team. I think you've really grown during the pandemic as a kind of remote team. So is that the culture now? Everybody stays in your homes and towns, and it's really working well for you?
Yeah, so far, yes. And we have been fortunate enough to be true, to find a truly dedicated team per se. But we have today people all across India. So we have people in Assam, we have people in Goa, we have people in Siliguri, we have people in Tirupur. All across India, the team is distributed. And like now, I think even like because we've been at it for around 2 years, we've gotten fairly good at managing remote teams per se. And like even if we today want to call a lot of people back to office, I don't think people are gonna come.
Yeah.
So it's
not the way the roads are today.
Right, exactly, right. So actually we tried, right? So we actually took up some space a couple of months back, I think after 2 years, and we tried it out for a week or so. And what we realized was that the time which we spend on, let's say, researching about the space or doing some work, etc., 1.5 hour of that time is just getting spent on the roads. So people revolted essentially that, hey, either I can travel or I can do this competitor research, you pick what you want to do. And then obviously like you just can't argue with that. So like rather than thinking of it as cultural thing, I would think of it as a business imperative today, that to attract talent, to essentially attract the best talent essentially. And one of the important things is that what we've realized is that a lot of the good talent sits out of tier 2, tier 3 India. And it is not just Bangalore which has the best software engineers. I'm sorry, Bangalore. I know a lot of people in Bangalore will get offended, but there are a lot of good people out there in tier 2, tier 3 and doing some great stuff, right? So you can't risk calling them to office because then you will not be able to get that talent to work with you. And secondly, from the business perspective, like also, I mean, there's just this sheer wastage of time which people spend on the roads, just doing nothing but looking at cars and bikes, right? So that time is, I believe, well spent on actually mastering your craft. But having said that, like at least, again, here also, there would be some roles per se, if I can say so, or some team / initiatives which definitely would need a bit more closer coordination. So we've seen like a mixed bag over here. So what we've seen is that roles which are very, very clearly defined, where like things like, let's say engineering, things like, if I can say so, UX or anything, like where essentially you have a clear expectation of an input and an output. They are very, very well managed, or they are very well suited for a remote kind of a setting. But whereas where there is a bit more fungibility in terms of expectations, in terms of the nature of the work which has to be done, that is where you probably need a bit more closer coordination. So just to point it out, like my belief is that the three founders, all three of us, we need to be together, because right now as a growing startup, there are a lot of unknowns which we have to face every day, right? And just decision making just happens faster when you are together, and essentially that is something which has to happen in real time, or essentially you need to basically, the problem which happens is that, hey, when you are, let's say, remote, and you certainly have a question about, let's say that the strategy coming, hey, should we try this approach? You don't want to wait for the other person's calendar to get free and give him or her a call, right? Or you don't want to go to Google, check out his or her calendar and see, okay, I'll be free, we can call now, right? You just want to talk. And that's when, because that is where this whole inspiration has come to you, and you want to talk it out with people. So I would say that when you have more decision making to do, you have more, let's say, ambiguity in operations, etc. That is where like the close proximity helps a lot. But if you have clearly defined roles, if you have clearly defined expectations, then with frequent communication, things can be managed very well remotely. So communication again plays a very important role. Maybe you should err on the side of over communication in a remote setting. That is what we have seen.
No, you're right. I mean, in decision making, that bit of spontaneity is also important, right? You want to try and get the immediate thought or the immediate reaction of someone else on the team. And while for others, you can schedule, plan, let them mull over it and come with their best ideas.
Because again, this is maybe a startup thing, but in a startup, you get 10 ideas every day. Right? And you don't know which one of them is good or bad. But if you think on an idea long enough, then you find enough negative points for that idea to shut that down. Even before discussing it with anyone else, yourself in your head shut an idea down, which could have been a perfectly viable idea. And that's just how it is. That's why you need to just blurt it out the moment you feel like an experiment, and take opinions of what your other founders feel or think about, etc. So that's one challenge I definitely see, that you kill a lot of ideas prematurely. And on the other hand, also you end up thinking about ideas for a much longer time than you should, essentially. There are some things which you should just do and figure it out, rather than think and figure it out. That's the balance which we are trying to kind of figure out, what's the best thing which works.
That's an interesting insight on startups and maybe even smaller teams where ideas are plenty, and like you said, you need to say it out, and to say it out you need an audience that's sitting in front of you. So and I guess hybrid is going to be the way to go slowly. Not everybody is going to come back, and there's no need to also. True. So what's the one thing that kind of, I hope it's nothing, but what's the one thing that keeps you awake at night? Like what's the biggest challenge or biggest problem you want to solve, or whatever it may be, but it keeps you awake?
I mean, as a startup founder, the only thing which matters at this stage, at least, is building a stable business and pushing for growth. So at least I think this is again a stage dependent thing. It will probably be different 1 year down the line, but as of today, it is primarily thinking about what could be the next avenue for growth, how to just get more customers. I think that's the only primary thing, just getting more customers and more growth, essentially, because end of the day, that is the only thing which is going to keep the company going and kind of keep the whole team aligned behind the mission, etc. So,
Personally, what excites you more? The going out and chasing potential customers, or building the product and digging deep into that?
Well, I'm personally more of a builder. So we always, had this idea of building a world-class product organization based out of India. And that is something which essentially comes naturally to us as well. And that's something, which excites us the most, building the best product, which is probably what you see in the time and amount of effort we put in just understanding the science and then building a product, etc. Because that is something which we are really passionate about. So the business part is something which is necessary thing, essentially has to come from in a founder's life. Yeah, that's something which is a necessary thing to do.
It also has me thinking that I think there's definitely a scope for a part 2 with you sometime later, because today I wanted to focus on the work that you're doing. But
Sure.
Being a fast-growing startup, there's a lot of curiosity for those outside of this space in terms of how founder dynamics works. What is all this funding and Series A and B and valuation, and how do you guys put up with the stress and strain of all of that? So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation for another time.
Yeah. I would love to do that.
So one last, you mentioned a couple of books, really great recommendations. If I had to ask you for that one thing you would want anybody and everybody you meet, or, especially the various teams in client organizations that you interact with, and you had to say, hey, this is one thing that you should read or listen to or watch, what might it be?
So we briefly touched about this whole concept of stress at work. You just spoke about that in part 2. You would love to know about that. But I believe, given today's circumstances, over the past 2 years, I think a lot of us have gone through a lot of stress, either economic, medical, or today we have a war going on somewhere in the world. What has become super essential is essentially taking care of your own mental well-being and handling stress better, right? And one of the skills which helps you manage stress and mental well-being better is the skill of optimism. Now, this is something, again, which I learned from the research which we had done, or the research papers which we had gone through. We came across this field of psychology called positive psychology, which talks about mental strength rather than mental weakness. So typically, psychology is always associated with mental illness, that they're trying to solve for depression and anxiety and PTSD and whatnot. But there is a positive or a strength side to it as well. So just like you build your muscles to kind of gather physical strength, similarly, there are a few psychological skills which you can develop to gather mental strength, and that is a preemptive way of staying away from stress and mental illness, etc. So psychological capital, or in fact, positive psychology recommends these 4 skills called HERO, which is where the name of the company also comes from, super beings. So there are these 4 skills called HERO. The acronym is HERO. They stand for hope, efficacy. Efficacy is basically self-confidence, resilience, and optimism. So H is for hope, E is for efficacy, R is for resilience, and O is for optimism. So the hero skills or psychological capital are basically the 4 key skills which form your psychological capital. So we have economic capital, we have human capital, we have social capital. These are the 3 capitals which we talk about predominantly. Positive psychology gives the 4th capital, which is psychological capital for organizations to work on. So rather than, that is basically the mental strength of your workforce. And if you can develop that is something which will take your organization to the next orbit, because you will have an army of super beings working for you. So in this context, Shubha, it was a long context, sorry for that, but I just wanted to...
No, very, very powerful.
Yes, I just wanted to give that context. So the father of positive psychology is this gentleman called Martin Seligman. And he has written this book called Learned Optimism, which talks about how you can build optimism as a skill in day-to-day life. And that is something which I would definitely want to recommend given the times we are going through. And I believe that is a skill which is potentially very, very important for every one of us to build. Be it startup founders, we need to be optimistic that things are going to work out, although it doesn't seem like that today. Similarly, in every other field, like as a parent, as a soldier, as a teacher, everyone needs to have optimism. And I think that is something which we can actively work upon, and read this book called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman.
Awesome recommendation. I think I love this note that we're ending on. And as a coach, it really resonates with me, because I think today, more than ever, optimism, resilience is becoming such an important life skill for each of us. It's seen us through, and those of us who have it to a certain degree, it has seen us through the last couple of years and helped us tremendously. And I think definitely thanks for that recommendation. I'm going to check it out. I have not read it. I look forward to it. Beautiful. So thank you so much, Yash. It's been a really enlightening conversation. Love the work that you guys are doing. I think the impact we will start to see, because as you start really reaching out to the leaders, right? When you impact one leader, there's such a huge cascading effect on their teams, and they learn and they grow, and it just flows down the organizations beautifully. So more power to you guys, and I will keep my eyes on you to see how you're doing, and we'll keep catching up. And like I said, there's definitely a part 2 somewhere down the line, because there's lots more to talk about.
We'll look forward to that, Shubha. It was a pleasure catching up with you as well.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening till the very end. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to leave us a note about the episode, please do write in at connect@raincraft.in or drop us a voice message at speakpipe.com/raincraft. All the details about our guest today and how you can find us on social media are available in the show notes. So please do have a read, and catch you next time.